morning everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today we're going to be taking a look at a new competitor in the budget micro red dot space. This is the AT3 Alpha. Now before we get into the video, if you'd like to help me out personally, you can of course like, share, and subscribe, as that is all free and does help me out quite a bit. On top of that, there's my website, which might actually have some stuff in stock currently, including a few new items. Now, there's also Subscribestar, which is basically just a pro to a Patreon, and that's about that. And while you're here, you might as well also start a fight in the comments about SIG versus Holosun red dots. Now, full disclosure on the AT3 Alpha that we have here. This was sent out to me by AT3. On top of that, I've also done reviews on some of their other products in the past. I did the video on their 1 to 4x LPVO, which was okay, but the 1 to 6 model was better. The AT3 RCO, which is kind of like an MRO at home, that had emitter refresh rate issues. And I've also done a video on their interlocking receiver sets, which are actually pretty decent for the money. Now, getting into the basics on the AT3 Alpha, this is going to be a competitor to your SIG Romeo 5, your Holosun 403R, 403B, your Vortex Crossfire, and your Northtac red dots. It's going to have a very similar feature set, price, weight, size, all that sort of thing to those red dots. So weight is about 6.5 ounces, including the mount. Without the mount, it's going to be a little bit lighter. You do have a 20mm objective lens, so your standard micro size red dot, and it is using a standard T1, T2 style footprint, so you can mix and match your mounts to your heart's content. I have had this on the super tall Midwest Industries night vision height riser, as well as the stock riser, which is not very good, which we'll get into in just a minute, and it's currently sitting on a UTG lower 1/3 mount. Now, talking about the externals on the optic, we of course have a top mounted rotary dial, as well as our battery tray that does have 11 settings. Settings 1 and 2 are supposedly their night vision settings, though those are probably very optimistic and going to be very, very situational, because again, with these lower tiered red dots, usually the light performance is not good enough for night vision users, though again, that is not something that I've personally tested out. And then of course you have all the way up to 11. At 11, it gets more than daylight bright. Usually I'm using it at somewhere between 9 and 10 when I'm outside, and then in certain circumstances, for certain people, you might need that 11th setting. Now, you also have exposed windage and elevation that are in half MOA increments, which again, for a 2 MOA dot, which we'll get into, is more than precise enough. They are very easy to adjust. Now, anytime we have exposed windage and elevation, there always is going to be a concern that those could accidentally adjust on their own if they get bumped, so on and so forth. You might have an issue with those adjusting. However, through many range trips, several drops at this point, that has not been an issue, though again, it is a slight concern, and they are very minorly exposed, though again, we haven't had an issue with them yet. Now, getting into the dot and battery life. So the dot itself is the super simple, super usable 2 MOA dot. The dot itself is very crisp, it's very precise, and it does all the standard 2 MOA dot things. Again, it is very quick to pick up, very usable, a good blend of speed and precision. Doesn't have anything fancy like an outer horseshoe or a chevron or BDCs, but again, it is just a very, very simple 2 MOA dot. Battery life at the lowest setting is rated at 50,000 hours, and then at a medium setting, they say it's rated for around 20,000 hours. So at a higher, more usable setting for outdoor shooting, probably around 10,000 hours, if that, but that's going to be combined with their auto on, auto off technology. Basically, anytime the optic is at rest for 15 minutes or longer, the dot will automatically turn off, conserving your battery life. So again, that dot is only ever on while you're actually using the gun. Now, getting into the glass quality on the AT3 Alpha, it's actually going to be pretty darn good for just about everything, again, outside of night vision use. There is basically no magnification, no warping whatsoever, and on top of that, it has a very, very low color tint to it, so they're not using a very aggressive notch filter. Some of your other optics, your Holosuns, generally use a more aggressive notch filter, depending on the model, of course. Northtac uses a more aggressive notch filter. This is going to be more on par with the SIG Romeo 5 that you currently see mounted to the Warn Ramp 30. Now, as you see it here, it is of course not using the included mount, and that's because the included mount isn't all that great. Basically, it uses a single, very, very tiny crossbolt that they only rate to 15 inch-pounds. On top of that, there is no recoil lug, so the included mount is not very good, which would be bad for this optic. But fortunately for this optic, all of its competitors' options are also very bad when it comes to their included mount. So the included mount, not particularly good. I would recommend switching out of it as soon as you can, but that's also my recommendation for your basic Sig Romeo 5 mounts. For your Holosun 403R, 403B mounts are also not very good. And then, of course, the Vortex Crossfire also does not come with a very good included mount. So you're going to be swapping out all of those mounts anyways. This one is no different. The only one of those budget red dots that actually comes with a fairly decent mount is actually your Northpack Ronin D12, I want to say. Now, currently on this optic, we have about 800 rounds, 400 rounds of blowback 9mm on the Bear Creek Arsenal bufferless 9mm setup. We also have about 200 rounds of 7.62x39, and then another couple hundred rounds on this Davidson Defense, their DD15. Now, this is the reassembled version, of course, because the original one that as they shipped it to me had quite some issues. Now, in terms of durability of the optic, getting into drop testing and stuff like that, the raw durability of these optics is going to be immense. Anytime you get into these very, very small aluminum holes, they're just going to be incredibly strong in terms of their raw mechanical strength. Usually, if you have an issue with one of these optics, it's going to be your emitter, some sort of electronic failure, glass or something like that could have an issue. The bodies of the optics themselves are usually insanely strong, and I have yet to kill a 20mm micro style red dot on an AR500 steel drop. Now, getting into the drops that we did on the AT3 Alpha, we do 2 drops from shoulder height, one onto dirt and rocks, which is a fairly hard impact and probably the hardest impact that a lot of your guns are going to experience. And then the second drop is again shoulder height, but this time onto an AR500 steel plate. Now, when we're doing red dots, I do the initial control group at 36 yards because I'm just using a red dot. That's generally where I zero most of my red dot guns, depending on caliber, barrel length, so on and so forth. So 36 yards for the 5-shot control group. Then we do a single drop from shoulder height onto the top of the optic on dirt and rocks. We do another 5-round group, and fortunately we experienced no shift in zero. Now after that, we do a second drop, the final drop onto an AR500 steel plate from, again, shoulder height directly on top of the optic. So this battery tray is taking all of the force of the drop. And we did experience some minor shift in zero, about an inch to the up and to the right, I want to say, which is about a 3 MOA shift because, again, we're only at 36 yards. So 3 MOA is a appreciable shift in zero. It will matter once you really get beyond, say, 100 yards, because if you're shooting at a smaller target at 200 yards, a 6-inch shift in point of impact is going to be substantial, again, depending on your target size. Now, while, of course, the optic itself is perfectly fine, it was able to be re-zeroed, no problem. The optic is not crushed, the glass is perfectly fine, no cracks, anything like that, because, again, the raw mechanical strength of the optic is very good. Its ability to retain zero, at least in this very inexpensive UTG mount, which is actually a much, much better mount than what is included with it, is not what I would consider to be perfect. Now, 3 MOA is still very good in the grand scheme of optics. LPVOs usually experience a much larger shift in zero if they survive at all, and many other more expensive prisms and larger style red dots have completely failed the test or shifted off of paper completely at, 36, 50 yards, depending on where I'm shooting that day. So 3 MOA is not perfect, and you don't want to give it a pass because it's not that bad, but it is certainly not the worst that we've seen, and it is something that's still usable inside of 50, 100 yards. You're not really going to notice that much of a difference. And again, on top of that, a shoulder height drop onto an AR500 steel target is probably unrealistic for 99% of people out there, but it is nice to know if something can pass something like that. Now, nicely about the AT3 Alpha is you do have a completely transferable full lifetime warranty on their product. So if it ever has a failure, a breakage, a stoppage, something like that, not only if you bought it will you get your money back or, again, a replacement or repair, but even if you were not the original owner, that warranty is fully transferable, which is a nice touch that they're actually standing behind the product. Now, overall, these are not particularly expensive. I want to say the MSRP is $120, which means that you're going to find these on sale for the low $100 mark, if not, $90 to $100 on sale, meaning that these are going to be very, very competitive with your SIG Romeo 5, Holosun 403R, 403B, Vortex Crossfire, your SIG MSR as well, but that's kind of a different optic entirely. And then you also your Northtac optics, which can also go on sale for around that $80 to $90 price tag. It's going to be very, very competitive. The main difference here and the two main distinguishing factors between some of the other optics is that this is going to have a top-mounted rotary dial / battery tray. I know a lot of people for some reason prefer the rotary dial to rubber buttons. I'm perfectly fine with either, so it doesn't really make much of a difference to me, but I know some people really like the rotary dial, and they also like it not to be on the side, so it's not occluding their peripheral vision. For me, not that big of a deal either way, and some people don't like to see exposed windage and elevation. Other than that, though, there's really not a lot to talk about. The dot is good, the emitter refresh rate is good, the glass quality itself is good for the price category. Battery life, battery features, auto on, auto off, again, very good for the price category, standard almost for the price category that it's in. I really have very, very little to complain about it. And I also, on the flip side of that, I also have very little to praise about it. It fits very well in the marketplace, and it's going to be very competitive with all of your other budget micro red dots. So, is it a particularly compelling buy? Well, not really, compared to, again, any of those other optics. They're probably all going to serve 99.9% of the same role and do it just as well. Plus or minus your minor margin of error on these inexpensive optics where you are going to have some lower QC issues, that sort of stuff, across all of the brands and optics. So again, if you already own any of those other aforementioned red dots, is there any reason to side grade to the AT3 Alpha? Well, not really, but again, if you're looking for a new red dot or you're just looking at red dots for the first time, this is something that you should consider, again, with a bunch of other micro red dots that, again, fulfill most of the same role. It is a good option if you like the top-mounted battery tray, you like the rotary dial, you like the exposed windage elevation, maybe you like the aesthetics as well. It does also come with a low mount, I believe, which some of those other optics don't. So if you want that versatility of being mounted low, tall, high, whatever, even though the included mounts aren't particularly great, at least it does have those options. So there's really not too much more to say about the optic, guys. Let me know what you guys think of the AT3 Alpha in the comments down below. And with all of that out of the way, guys, I do want to say thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.